The stars had never looked so cold to Admiral Kethvorin as they did on the day humanity finally surrendered. He stood on the observation deck of his massive flagship called the Eternal Dominion and watched Earth burn beneath him orange wounds. A fire spread across the blue surface of the planet as orbital bombardment continued to strike the last human cities. 17 billion humans had lived on this world just 3 years ago. Now most of them were dead and the survivors hid like rats in underground bunkers. His aide approached with clicking mandibles and forearms folded in a gesture of respect. "Admiral, the human government has transmitted their formal surrender." The aide reported with obvious satisfaction in his voice. "Their fleet is completely destroyed, and their colonies across 20 star systems have been captured." Kethvorin turned all 4 of his eyes toward his aide and made a sound of contempt. "They lasted longer than our war planners predicted." He admitted grudgingly, 3 years against the combined might of 12 species in the hegemony, and they still managed to make us bleed. The aide shifted uncomfortably because this was true humanity had fought with a kind of desperate fury that the galaxy had never witnessed before. They had won battles they should have lost by every logical calculation. They had destroyed hegemony ships that outgunned them 10 to 1. They had earned a reputation for being absolutely unwilling to accept defeat, even when defeat was certain. But in the end, none of that mattered. Numbers and resources always won eventually. Hegemony controlled 10,000 star systems and commanded fleets that darkened the skies of entire worlds. Humanity had controlled barely 50 systems, and now they controlled nothing at all. "What are your orders regarding the survivors, Admiral?" the aide asked. Kethvorin waved one of his 4 arms dismissively. "Standard protocols for conquered species," he said without emotion. "Processing camps for population control and labor allocation to serve our needs. Archive whatever passes for their culture and strip their worlds of useful technology. Within a generation, they will fade into irrelevance, like so many species before them." The aide bowed and left to carry out these orders. Kethvorin returned his attention to the burning world below and felt something close to satisfaction. The humans had been a problem, and now that problem was solved. They would become another footnote in the long history of species that had challenged the hegemony and lost. What the Admiral did not know and could not possibly suspect was that 7 kilometers beneath the ruins of the city once called Geneva there existed a bunker that appeared on no schematic or map. This bunker had been built 2 centuries ago and then erased from every record. Only 17 people in all of human history had ever known its existence, and 12 of those people were now dead. General Sarah Chun was one of the 5 who remained alive. She stood in the command center of this hidden facility and stared at a holographic display that showed something the hegemony would never understand, something humanity had kept secret for over 200 years, something called Project Lazarus. "They think it is over," she whispered to herself. Her hand hovered over a single red button on the console before her. Colonel James Okonkwo stood beside her with his arms crossed and his face grim. "General, are you certain about this?" he asked quietly. "Once we begin this process, there is no way to reverse it. The consequences will be beyond anything we can predict or control." Chun turned to look at him with eyes that had seen too much death and too much loss. "James, I watched my daughter die when they bombed Singapore," she said. "I watched our fleet get torn apart at the Battle of Mars. I watched humanity lose everything we built over 10,000 years of civilization." She turned back to the display. "The hegemony believes they have won because they destroyed our ships and captured our worlds. They think military victory means the war is over. They have no idea what we are about to wake up. Deep within the bunker, beyond multiple security checkpoints and doors that required genetic verification to open, there was a chamber. This chamber was cold and dark and filled with equipment that hummed with strange energies. In the center of this chamber, suspended by electromagnetic fields and quantum locks that had taken 50 years to develop there, floated something that did not belong in normal space. It was large, perhaps 20 meters across, and it was made of dark chitin and folded limbs that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human. Eyes could perceive veins of sickly bioluminescent light pulsed through its body in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Even in its dormant state, even bound by technology, it should not have been able to overcome this thing radiated a sense of wrongness that made every human who entered the chamber feel sick with primal fear. This was the queen of the Kazul, mother of nightmares. Last survivor of an invasion that humanity had fought 2 centuries ago and then erased from every history. Book Dr. Emil Vasquez was the head scientist of Project Lazarus, and he had spent his entire adult life studying this creature. He approached General Chun with obvious reluctance in every step. "General, I need you to understand what you are asking," he said with a trembling voice. "If we release her, she will call her children. All of them. Every Kazul that survived the first war is still out there hiding in the spaces between dimensions. They have been waiting for 200 years. They are hungry." Chun nodded slowly. "That is exactly what I am counting on. But General," Vasquez continued desperately, "they will kill everything. The hegemony, yes, but also innocent species and neutral worlds, and perhaps even—" "No," Chun interrupted firmly. "We did not just study her for 2 centuries, Emil. We learned to communicate with her. We learned to understand how her species thinks. And before she went into stasis, we made a deal." Vasquez stared at her with disbelief. "A deal with that thing?" "A deal." Chun confirmed. "The Kazul are not mindless monsters. They are ancient, and they are terrible, but they have their own sense of honor. We spared her life when we could have destroyed her completely. She remembers that mercy, and she agreed that if we ever needed her help, she would repay that debt." Above them, on the surface of Earth, the hegemony forces continued their occupation. They rounded up human survivors and processed them for labor camps. They stripped human cities of technology and resources. They congratulated themselves on their complete and total victory. Admiral Kethvoran sent a message to the Hegemony Supreme Council declaring that the human problem had been permanently solved. The council sent back praise and honors for his successful campaign. None of them had any idea that deep beneath the rubble of a destroyed city, an old woman with nothing left to lose was about to change the fate of the entire galaxy. General Chun placed her hand on the red button. "Begin. Project Lazarus," she ordered. "It is time to show the hegemony what happens when they push humanity to the edge of extinction. It is time to summon the nightmares." 217 years before Earth fell to the hegemony, humanity had made first contact with intelligent alien life. But it was not the hegemony they encountered first. It was something far older and far more terrible. The Kazul came through a tear in the fabric of space near Jupiter's moon. Europa scientists at the Europa Research Station were the first to witness it. One moment there was empty space, and the next moment there was a wound in reality itself, a hole that glowed with colors that human eyes were not designed to see. Through that hole came ships that looked like they had been grown rather than built. Ships made of dark chitin and pulsing organic matter. Ships that moved in ways that violated the laws of physics, as humanity understood them. And inside those ships were the Kazul themselves. They were creatures of nightmare, given physical form. Some had dozens of limbs that folded in impossible directions. Some existed partially in dimensions that human senses could not perceive, so they appeared to flicker in and out of reality. Some were vast and some were small, but all of them shared one thing in common. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They did not want territory or resources or slaves. They simply consumed. The Europa Research Station, with its 300 scientists and support staff, was gone within 6 hours. Every human on that moon was dead, and the Kazul had not even slowed down. They moved toward Earth with the Patience of a species that had destroyed countless worlds across millions of years. Humanity had 18 months to prepare for their arrival. In those 18 months, the nations of Earth did something they had never managed to do in all of human history. They united completely and absolutely against a common enemy. Every weapon was pointed outward. Every factory produced ships and missiles and bombs. Every scientist worked on understanding the enemy. 3 billion humans died in the war that followed. Entire cities were consumed by casual swarms that poured down from orbit like living darkness. The creatures were hard to kill because they did not fully exist in normal space. Bullets passed through them, and energy weapons seemed to make them stronger. But humanity learned. They learned that nuclear weapons could hurt the Kazul because the radiation disrupted their connection to other dimensions. They learned that certain electromagnetic frequencies caused the creatures pain. They learned that the Kazul were organized around queens, and that killing a queen threw all her children into chaos. Most importantly, they learned that the Kazul could be bound. A brilliant physicist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka discovered that the dimensional nature of the Kazul made them vulnerable to specific patterns of energy. If you could generate the right frequencies in the right configuration, you could trap a Kazul in normal space. You could hold it prisoner. The war reached its climax in orbit around Mars. The Kazul Queen who led the invasion force was ancient beyond human comprehension. She had consumed species that were old when Earth's sun was young. She had never known defeat, but humanity threw everything they had at her. Thousands of nuclear weapons, orbital bombardment platforms, suicide attacks by brave pilots who knew they would not survive. The Queen was wounded badly, and in that moment of weakness, Dr. Tanaka's experimental binding technology was deployed. The trap closed around the Queen. She was not dead, but she was caught, held in a state between life and death, between dimensions. Her children felt their mother's capture, and they screamed across frequencies that drove humans mad with terror. But without their queen to guide them, they were disorganized, and lost. Humanity hunted down every last Kazul that remained in normal space. They burned them with nuclear fire. They shattered them with kinetic bombardment. They destroyed every trace of the invasion force until nothing remained except the bound queen. The war was over. Humanity had won, but at a terrible cost. 3 billion dead. Entire continents reduced to radioactive wasteland. The species was traumatized in ways that would take generations to heal. The leaders of Earth gathered in secret to decide what to do. Some wanted to destroy the Queen immediately. She was too dangerous to keep alive. They argued, what if she escaped? What if she called more of her kind? But others argued for a different approach. Dr. Tanaka had been studying the bound Queen, and she had made a remarkable discovery. The Kazul were intelligent, truly intelligent in ways that went beyond mere animal cunning. They had language and culture and even a form of honor, and the Queen could communicate not with words but with direct mental contact. She spoke to Dr. Tanaka in dreams and visions, and gradually they came to understand each other. The Queen revealed that she was not angry about her capture. She was impressed. In millions of years of consuming species across the galaxy, she had never encountered one that could fight back effectively. She had never been wounded. She had never been trapped. Humanity had done both. This earned her respect. Dr. Tanaka proposed something that seemed insane. She proposed making a deal with the Queen. The humans would spare her existence. They would keep her in stasis rather than destroying her. In return, she would owe humanity a debt. If humanity ever faced extinction at the hands of another enemy, the Queen would repay that debt. She would call her children from the dark spaces between dimensions. She would unleash them upon humanity's enemies. And when the enemies were destroyed, she would take her children and leave. She would not harm humanity or anyone under humanity's protection. The Queen agreed. Perhaps she was curious about these strange small creatures who had beaten her. Perhaps she saw something in humanity that reminded Her of her own species in ages past. Perhaps she simply wanted to survive. Whatever her reasons, she made the oath, and the Kazul considered oaths to be sacred. The deal was sealed. The Queen was placed in permanent stasis deep beneath the city of Geneva. The war was erased from history. Every record was destroyed. Every survivor was sworn to secrecy on pain of death. The nations of Earth agreed that this knowledge was too dangerous to share. Future generations would not know about the Kazul, or the war, or the Queen sleeping beneath their feet. Only a handful of people would carry the secret and pass it on to trusted successors. Project Lazarus was born. For 200 years, humanity lived in ignorance of what lay beneath Geneva. They rebuilt their civilization. They spread to other worlds. They eventually encountered the hegemony and learned that the galaxy was full of alien species who viewed humanity as primitive and weak. But the keepers of Project Lazarus remembered General Sarah Chun's grandmother had been one of those keepers. She had passed the knowledge to Sarah's mother, who had passed it to Sarah. Now Sarah stood in the chamber where the Queen had slept for over 2 centuries. The creature hung suspended in her prison of energy fields. She looked dead, but Sarah knew she was only sleeping, waiting. Wake up. Sarah whispered, "We need you now." The bioluminescent veins in the Queen's body began to pulse with new light. Deep in the spaces between dimensions, something vast stirred, and across the galaxy, the Kazul who had hidden in the dark for 200 years suddenly lifted their heads. Their mother was calling. The hunt was about to begin. The chamber deep beneath Geneva was filled with the last leaders of humanity. Generals who had lost their armies. Scientists who had watched their life's work burn. Politicians who now governed nothing but ruins. They had gathered here because General Sarah Chun had summoned them with a message that promised one thing: hope. Most of them had never heard of Project Lazarus. Most of them did not know this bunker existed. When they saw what hung in the center of the chamber suspended by shimmering fields of energy, they reacted with horror and confusion. "What is that thing?" demanded Admiral Wei, who had commanded the last human fleet before it was destroyed. "That is our salvation," Chun replied calmly, "or our doom, depending on how you look at it." She explained everything: the forgotten war, the Kazul invasion, the 3 billion dead, the capture of the Queen, and the deal that had been made. When she finished speaking, the Tilo chamber was silent for a long moment. Colonel Okonkwo was the first to find his voice. "You are telling us that for 200 years, humanity has kept a sleeping nightmare goddess imprisoned under Geneva, and now you want to wake her up?" "Yes," Chun said simply. "This is madness," sputtered a politician whose name Chun had already forgotten. "You cannot seriously be proposing that we unleash these creatures on the galaxy. The hegemony has conquered us," Chun replied. "They are processing our people into labor camps. Within a generation, humanity will cease to exist as a civilization. We have nothing left to lose." Dr. Emil Vasquez stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "The Queen has been monitored continuously for 2 centuries, he said. "Her brain activity suggests she has been aware of the outside world, even in stasis. She knows what has happened to humanity. She knows we are calling on her. And you believe she will honor a deal made 200 years ago?" Admiral Wei asked skeptically. "I believe she will," Chun said. "The Kazul are not human, but they have their own code. They consider oaths to be binding across all time and all dimensions. She gave her word, and she will keep it." The debate continued for 3 more hours. Some argued they should accept their fate rather than unleash something they could not control. Others pointed out that accepting their fate meant extinction. In the end, the vote was unanimous. They had no other options. If there was even a small chance that the Queen would honor her ancient deal, then they had to take it. The ritual began at midnight. Chun had chosen this time not for any mystical reason, but because she wanted the moment to feel significant. If humanity was going to summon nightmares from the void between dimensions, they might as well do it properly. The scientists began the process of loosening the containment fields. Layer after layer of protection was peeled away. Energy barriers that had held for 2 centuries were carefully disabled. As each layer fell away, the queen stirred more. Her folded limbs began to twitch. Her bioluminescent veins pulsed faster. Chun felt pressure building in her skull as the queen's consciousness pushed against her mind. She is trying to communicate. Vasquez warned, "Let her." Chun said. The queen's voice entered Chun's mind like ice water pouring into her brain. It was not words exactly, but meanings and images and feelings that translated themselves into something Chun could understand little. "Burning ones," the voice echoed with age beyond comprehension. "You wake me from my long sleep. You must be desperate indeed." Chun spoke aloud so the others could hear her side of the conversation. "We are desperate," she admitted. "Our enemies have conquered our world. They have killed billions of our people. They plan to erase us from history. These enemies," the queen's interest sharpened. "They are not my children." "No," Chun confirmed. "They are called the Hegemony, 12 species who control most of the galaxy. They decided that humanity was a threat, and they crushed us. And you wish me to destroy them?" "Yes." Something like laughter rippled through Chun's mind. It was not a pleasant sensation. Several of the other humans in the chamber collapsed as the psychic pressure overwhelmed them. "I remember you little burning ones." The queen's voice became almost fond. "You fought my children with fire and radiation. You hurt me, as nitrogen monoxide species has. Hurt me in a million years. You could have killed me, but you chose to bind me instead. A mercy I did not expect." "We hoped we would never need to wake you," Chun said. "We hoped we would never need to collect on our deal. Yet here you are. Yet here we are." Silence stretched between them. Chun could feel the queen considering. She was ancient beyond human understanding, and she did not make decisions. "Quickly, my children have waited in the dark places for 200 of your years." When the queen spoke again, her voice was heavier. "They are hungry, they have dreamed of hunting and feeding, and they have been denied. If I call them, they will come. They will feast. We understand." "Do you?" The queen's presence pressed harder against Chun's mind. "You understand that I will unleash a force that will devour everything in its path. Your enemies will be destroyed utterly. Their worlds will be consumed. Their species will be ended. This is what you want." Chun thought of Earth burning. She thought of the labor camps and the processing centers. She thought of her daughter dying in the bombardment of Singapore. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "This is what we want." "Very well." The queen's massive form began to glow brighter. "The covenant is remembered. The debt is acknowledged. My children will destroy your enemies. Every ship will be torn apart. Every world will be silenced. Every soldier will be consumed. And when the feast is done, we will return to the dark. We will not touch humanity, or those under humanity's protection. This I swear by the old darkness that birthed my kind." Chun felt tears running down her face, though she did not know if they were from relief or fear. "Then we have a deal. Release me, little burning ones." The queen's voice rose to a crescendo. "Let me sing to my children. Let me call them from the spaces between spaces. Let me show this galaxy what it means to wake the sleepers in the dark. Do it." Chun ordered. The final containment fields fell away. The queen rose from her 2-century sleep, and across 1,000 light years in dimensions that human minds could not perceive, something vast and hungry began to move. The Gazul were coming, and nothing in the galaxy was prepared for what was about to happen. Admiral Kethvorin was enjoying a victory celebration when the first reports came in. The grand hall of his flagship was filled with officers from a dozen different hegemony species. They drank intoxicants and feasted on delicacies from conquered worlds. They congratulated each other on the successful subjugation of humanity. Music played and laughter echoed through the chamber. Then an aide rushed in with a communication device clutched in trembling hands. "Admiral, we are receiving emergency." Transmissions from the Outer Rim territories. Kethvorn frowned at the interruption. What kind of emergency? Unknown attackers, sir. The aide said, something is destroying our outposts. Human rebels? Kethvorn asked with irritation. No, sir. The aide's voice cracked. The descriptions do not match any known species. They are describing impossible things. Kethvorn took the communication device and listened to the transmissions himself. What he heard made his 4 eyes widen with confusion. The voices were panicked and terrified in ways he had never heard from trained military personnel. They screamed about creatures that passed through solid walls. They described swarms that seemed to eat light itself. They spoke of ships being dragged into holes in space that appeared without warning. One transmission was nothing but screaming until it cut off abruptly. This is nonsense, Kethvorn declared. These must be sensor malfunctions or some kind of mass hysteria. But within hours, the scattered reports became a flood. System after system in the Outer Rim went dark. Entire fleets that had been stationed to garrison conquered. UN colonies simply vanished. The few survivors who managed to escape brought stories that sounded like the ravings of the insane. A captain from the species called Valkyrie arrived at Hegemony Central Command 3 days after the first attacks. His scales had turned white from shock and his hands would not stop shaking. They came out of nowhere. He reported in a voice that kept breaking. Tears in space opened around our fleet. Things came through. I cannot describe them properly because my mind refuses to remember. Clearly, they had too many limbs and too many eyes, and they existed in ways that should not be possible. Our weapons did nothing. Energy beams passed through them. Missiles exploded without causing damage. They tore our ships apart like we were made of paper. They ate our crews while they were still alive. I only escaped because I was in a shuttle doing a supply run. I watched my entire fleet die in less than an hour. The Hegemony Supreme Council called an emergency meeting. 12 species had ruled the galaxy together for 10,000 years. They had crushed countless rebellions and conquered hundreds of worlds. They had never encountered anything they could not defeat. But this was different. Reports were coming in from across their territory. Now the attacks were spreading inward from the Outer Rim. Whatever these creatures were, they were moving fast, and they were leaving nothing alive in their wake. What are these things? Demanded Counselor Thrix of the insectoid Caxon species. Where did they come from? We have analyzed all available data, reported the chief military scientist. The creatures do not match any species in our records. Their technology, if it can be called technology, appears to be biological in nature. They seem to be able to manipulate dimensions in ways we do not understand. Most concerning is that they appear to be organized. They are not attacking randomly. They are systematically destroying every hegemony military asset in their path. If they were truly attacking at random, some civilian populations would have been hit by now. Instead, every attack has targeted our ships and our military installations. It is as if someone is directing them. Admiral Kethvorn felt cold dread settle in his stomach. The humans, he whispered. What about the humans? Asked Counselor Velener with confusion. The attacks started 3 days after the humans surrendered. Kethvorn said slowly. They started in the Outer Rim near human space. And you said these creatures are only attacking military targets. Our military targets. The council chamber fell silent as the implication sank in. That is impossible. Counselor Thrix objected. The humans were a primitive species. We destroyed their entire civilization. They could not possibly have access to something like this. And yet, Kethvorn replied grimly, and yet the attacks are clearly targeted. And they clearly benefit humanity. On Earth, General Sarah Chun watched the reports coming in from across the galaxy and felt something she had not felt in years. Hope the casual were moving through hegemony space like a plague. They appeared from tears in reality struck with overwhelming force and then vanished before any organized response could form hegemony warships that could glass. Entire planets were being torn apart by creatures that treated conventional physics as a mild suggestion. Species that had bullied their way across the galaxy for thousands of years were discovering what it felt like to be prey. And everywhere the Tazul went, they left humanity untouched. Human survivors in labor camps watched in amazement as nightmare. Creatures ripped their captors apart and then simply walked past the humans without a glance. Human ships that had been captured were ignored, while hegemony vessels nearby were reduced to debris. The Queen was keeping her word. The Covenant was being honored. The Hegemony Supreme Council sent desperate communications to Earth. At first they demanded to know what humanity had done. They threatened terrible consequences. Chun responded to these threats with a single sentence. What exactly are you going to do to us that you have not already done? The threats stopped. The pleas began. They offered to release all human prisoners. They offered to withdraw from human space. They offered reparations and apologies and anything humanity wanted. Chun responded to each message the same way. You wanted humanity to fade into irrelevance like so many species before us. Now fade. The hegemony tried to fight back. They assembled their largest fleet ever gathered and moved to intercept. The Tazul 20,000 warships from 12 species, the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. The battle lasted 40 minutes. The Tazul emerged from dimensional tiers all around the fleet. They were everywhere at once. They passed through shields and armor as if they did not exist. They dragged ships into pockets of twisted space where the crews died. Screaming, the flagship of the combined fleet was the last to fall. Admiral Kethvorn watched his empire die around him in his final moments before a creature with too many eyes dragged him into the dark. He understood the truth. Humanity had not been the weak, primitive species the hegemony believed them to be. They've been survivors of something far worse than the hegemony could imagine, and they had kept their greatest weapon hidden for 200 years waiting. The defeat of the combined fleet broke the hegemony's will to resist. Species that had stood together for 10,000 years now scrambled to save themselves. They abandoned their allies and fled to their homeworlds, hoping the nightmare would pass them by. It did not. The Kazul were thorough. The Queen had promised to destroy humanity's enemies, and she was keeping that promise completely. Every world that had participated in the war against humanity was visited. Every military installation was consumed. Every warship was torn apart. The 12 species of the hegemony learned what countless other species had learned across millions of years. When the Kazul came, there was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. There was only the dark and the hunger and the end. 6 months after the Queen woke from her ancient sleep, the galaxy was transformed. The hegemony that had ruled 10,000 star systems was gone. Not defeated, not conquered, simply gone. Their fleets were debris floating in the void. Their military installations were empty husks. Their homeworlds were silent, except for scattered survivors who had hidden well enough to escape the harvest. 12 species that had dominated the galaxy for millennia had been reduced to remnants and refugees. And then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the Kazul withdrew across the galaxy. The tiers in reality sealed themselves. The nightmare creatures retreated back to the dark spaces between dimensions. The swarms and the horrors and the things with two many eyes vanished like shadows when the light is turned on. Only the Queen remained. She floated in the chamber beneath Geneva, where she had slept for 2 centuries. But now she was awake and aware, and her bioluminescent veins pulsed with terrible vitality. General Sarah Chun stood before her without fear. After everything she had witnessed, fear seemed like a pointless emotion. The covenant is fulfilled. The Queen's voice echoed in Chun's mind. Your enemies are destroyed. My children have feasted. Well, they are satisfied for now. Will you return? Chun asked aloud. Perhaps the Queen's massive form shifted as she considered the question. In another age when we hunger again, or perhaps your descendants will wake us for another war, there are always wars. There's always hunger. You could stay. Chun said, "The galaxy is open now. There is no one left who could stop you from taking whatever you want." The Queen's response felt like cold amusement. "We could, but we will not. You are fascinating creatures, little burning ones you showed me. Mercy when you could have shown me destruction. You remembered that mercy when all seemed lost, and you trusted you. To keep our word, we did not have much choice." There is always a choice. The Queen's presence pressed gently against Chun's mind. "You chose to believe that even nightmares of Anna?" You were right. A long silence stretched between them, human and alien regarding each other across a gulf of biology and evolution and understanding that should have been impossible to bridge. "We are returning to the dark now," the Queen said. "Finally, the spaces between dimensions are our home. We do not belong in your reality for long. But remember this, we are always there watching from the darkness. If you ever need use again, you know how to call. I hope we never need to." Chun said honestly, "So do I, little burning one. So do I." The Queen's form began to fade. She was not leaving physically, but sliding sideways into dimensions that human senses could not perceive. "Rule well humanity." Her final words echoed as she disappeared. "The galaxy is yours. Now, try not to make the same mistakes as those who came before you." Then she was gone. The chamber was empty, except for the humming equipment and the fading glow of containment fields that were no longer needed. Chun stood alone in the silence and allowed herself to feel something she had not felt since this war began: relief. In the years that followed, humanity rebuilt. But they did not rebuild as conquerors. They had seen what conquest led to. They had witnessed the complete destruction of an empire that thought it could rule the galaxy through force. They chose a different path. Human ships spread across the former hegemony space not to claim territory, but to help. They brought food to starving populations. They provided medical care to wounded refugees. They offered protection to species that had no military left to defend themselves. Some of these species had been enemies just months ago. Some of them had participated in the invasion of Earth. Some of them had cheered when humanity fell. None of that mattered anymore. The old grudges seemed small and petty compared to what everyone had survived. Slowly, cautiously, the species of the galaxy began to trust humanity, not because humans were powerful though. Everyone knew they were. Not because humans had weapons that could end civilizations, though everyone knew they did. But because humans chose mercy when they could have chosen revenge. They chose to rebuild when they could have ruled. They chose to help when they could have let their former enemies suffer. A new galactic council was formed 10 years after the fall of the hegemony. Representatives from over 100 species gathered in a great hall built on neutral ground. Humans sat among them not as conquerors, but as equals. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, who was the granddaughter of the scientist who had first bound the Casual Queen, spoke for humanity. "We do not seek dominion," she said to the assembled delegates. "We do not seek revenge for what was done to us. We seek only to build a galaxy where no species faces extinction at the hands of another." She paused and let her gaze sweep across the chamber. Every delegate was watching her with careful attention. They all knew what humanity had done. They all knew what humanity could do again if they chose. But let me be clear about something else. Tanaka continued. We still have the ability to call the Kazul. We still know the frequencies that wake the Queen, and we will not hesitate to use them if any species threatens genocide against another. The chamber was absolutely silent. The hegemony thought the fight was over when Earth fell. Tanaka said, they believed that military victory meant they had won. They were wrong. The fight is never over while humanity draws breath. We adapt and we endure, and we make friends in unexpected places. She smiled, and it was not a threatening smile, but it was not entirely friendly. either even in the dark between dimensions. The new Galactic Council ratified a charter that day, a charter that guaranteed the right of every species to exist, a charter that outlawed wars of conquest and genocide, a charter that humanity would enforce with whatever means necessary. In the decades and centuries that followed, the galaxy entered an era of peace it had never known before. Not because everyone became friends. There were still conflicts and disagreements and rivalries, but no one ever again tried to destroy another species completely. No one wanted to be the reason humanity called the nightmares back. And somewhere in the spaces between dimensions in the darkness that existed outside of normal reality, an ancient queen dreamed. She dreamed of fire and fury. She dreamed of a small blue world that burned, but would not break. She dreamed of tiny creatures who stared into the abyss and taught the abyss to fear them, and her dreams. The mother of nightmares smiled, because humanity had done something that no other species had ever accomplished in all her millions of years of existence. They had earned her respect. They had earned her friendship. They had shown her that even the smallest creatures could contain infinite courage, and if the galaxy ever forgot that lesson, she would be happy to remind them